Hello and welcome to Newswire. It's a new week ahead for us and you, and we'll start today's show with Afghanistan. President Ashraf Ghani on Saturday met with a number of political figures and former jihadi leaders and discussed the peace process. This included former President Hamid Karzai and the Chief Executive Officer Dr. Abdullah. Now, their relationship with Afghanistan and Washington's has continued to be tense, as the Afghan government says that while U.S. negotiates with the Taliban, they have been left out completely. Is President Ghani positioning himself to perhaps be a spoiler maybe in the still fragile negotiations and looking out for his presidency? That is a question we will be addressing, the significance of the political leaders he has been speaking to. Also, meanwhile, we've seen General Dostum, the leader of the Uzbek ethnic minority in Afghanistan and a bitter foe of the Taliban, who has just returned to Mazar-e-Sharif after a personal trip to Uzbekistan. He survived 2 assassination attempts. Of course, right now there is a question of who takes responsibility of these assassination attempts, as the Taliban and the Islamic State have come up with this claim. Now, he himself is seen as a major controversial figure, though one with quite a clout in northern and northwest Afghanistan. We will also be discussing his role in the political landscape. First, we have Mr. Javid Faisal. He is a political analyst. You are joining us from Kabul. And also on the line, we have Mr. Osman Sharifi, a journalist who will be talking to us also from Kabul, Afghanistan. Welcome to both of you to Newswire. Let me start with you, Mr. Javid Faisal. In your view, what is the significance of President Ghani at this time meeting these political leaders that he did on Saturday?
Thank you for having me. I think it's this opportunity for peace is a unique opportunity. We did not have such an opportunity in the past, with having US on board, having Russia on board, having Iran on board, the Arabs and mainly Pakistan. I think these are all good signs together. So this is another opportunity for President Ghani as the leader of the country and as the leader of the government. It's very, very important to bring all political forces on board, the forces that are within Afghanistan, because it's a peace for everybody. It's a peace for all Afghans, not just for government in Taliban. We are the Afghan people are the primary victims of war. So it's good for him to have all these political figures together, to talk to them, and to make sure that before we enter an intra-Afghan dialogue, we do have one voice. We are united, and that there is the national consensus on peace in what should come out of these peace talks with the Taliban.
There's also a concern about whether the Afghans will lose out in both ways. And Mr. Sharifi, let me pull you in here for your viewpoint, because the presidential elections keep getting delayed. Now they are slated for September 28th. And at the same time, there is a fear that maybe a peace deal will not be achieved between the US and the Taliban. What then?
Well, that's a concern many Afghans have, that the peace talks will fail. But as Mr. Faisal put it, this is also a great kind of unprecedented opportunity and chance that Afghanistan has to put an end to the 40-year-old conflict. We have, for the first time, we've had an inter-Afghan dialogue between Afghan politicians and the Taliban, prominent leaders in Moscow. And for now, it seems like there will be another meeting, another big meeting, intra-Afghan meetings, sometimes in mid-April. So for now, it seems like the Afghan government, who been complaining to have been sidelined in the past talks, is trying to, as they themselves put it, to change the various peace efforts into a utilized stance on peace talks, and perhaps the Afghan government is trying to kind of lead that peace talk itself.
But Mr. Sharifi, what kind of a political landscape do you envision from the way Ghani is aligning himself or speaking to important political leaders now?
President Ashraf Ghani himself said on Sunday in a tweet that the meetings that he had with prominent political leaders, some of whom, or most of whom, have participated in Moscow peace talks, were constructive. And there are already suggestions or hints or reports, various media reports, that this time, in the next round of peace talks, the Taliban may accept some level of national unity government presence in intra-Afghan peace talks. So, the Afghan government, which has been sidelined, is now trying to have play a much significant role in the upcoming peace talks, which will hopefully happen sometimes in late April. We hope for that. We hope every Afghan, we all desire peace, and the hope is that this round of peace talks will lead to a better result, and probably will lead in the coming months, and or perhaps it will take longer years to a conclusion that will see a cessation of fighting in Afghanistan.
Right. And also, Mr. Faisal, as tensions between Washington and Kabul seem to be on the rise over the more active involvement of Ghani's government in these peace talks, do you think there is a possibility, or are there any signals that we can interpret where President Ghani might be looking for another regional power to be an ally for them ahead in preparation of these elections?
I don't think that's true, and I don't think there are any signs of such efforts driven by the Afghan government or by President Ghani. However, I believe Afghans and Americans must work together. We have agreed on a platform. It's a mutual agreement that we have to be fighting terrorism. They are not fighting for us, but we do. We do fight for them and for ourselves in this region. So we are in investment in this area here. So it's good for them to have good relations with us, and good for us to have good relations with them. But the Afghan government does have legitimate concerns. If there is any peace process, it's with the Afghans. Americans are not making peace with the Taliban, or Taliban are not making peace with Americans. Even if they do agree on certain terms, even if Americans and Taliban agree on a peace deal and they sign it, the execution of that agreement is the responsibility and is the authority of the Afghan government. The implementing body of such an agreement could only be the Afghan government, nobody else. If it comes to the release of the detainees for the Taliban, if it comes to the withdrawal of international forces from Afghanistan, or if it comes to the guarantees about the Afghan territory not getting used against others, it's the Afghan government who can guarantee all these areas, not the Taliban or any other powers. So at the end of the day, even if these peace talks move forward and if they are positive, it should finally be ended with the Afghan government, with nobody else. So that's why I don't think Americans have a choice without working with Afghans. And I don't think Taliban are trying to do it on their own, because they should also know that the Afghan government is here as a side. And it's just not the Afghan government, it's the Afghan people. We here as a country do matter. There is one side that's Taliban, and there is the other side that's the Afghan people, which includes Ashraf Ghani, which includes Hamid Karzai, which includes Ashraf Abdullah, me, and Usman, and others. So we are the other side of this process. And it's not just Ghani. If they agree and Ghani doesn't agree, things should go the way they want them. We also have values here. We also have freedoms in here. We also have concerns that should be addressed. What Ghani, or what his national security advisor has addressed lately, those are the concerns that we have. Of course, we do want peace, but with what price? A dignified peace, a long-lasting peace, and a peace that could rescue and secure our achievements, not destroy them.
So while there are some positivity and expectations from the Taliban that they will be open now, a little more open than before, to the idea of an intergovernment dialogue, there's concern when individuals like General Dostum is back in the fray. I mean, there were 2 major assassination attempts just recently on him. He is known to be a hardcore anti-Taliban stance, and there are reports from various news agencies saying that this attack was, some say by the Taliban, some say from the Islamic State. Who do you, first of all, think has the responsibility, claims the correct responsibility of this attack? Mr. Sharifi?
Well, the Taliban has officially claimed responsibility for the attack. They've said that their men ambushed General Dostum's convoy in Balkh province, in northern Balkh province, killing and injuring a number of his men. And we have General Dostum's people, his spokesman, Mr. Tayin, saying that at least one bodyguard of General Dostum was killed and 2 others injured, while a number of Taliban, 2 were taken captive and 10 more killed or wounded. And this is not an unexpected thing. The Taliban, as you said, have ambushed, attacked General Dostum's convoys in the past repeatedly. As you mentioned yourself, General Dostum, while currently serving as the first vice president of Afghanistan, has been a military man. He has, after taking position as first vice president of Afghanistan, he went to northern Afghanistan and conducted military operations, conducted Afghan forces and also local militiamen, known as uprising forces, to clear some parts of northern Afghanistan from the Taliban. And this time, he being back in the north is not a good news for the Taliban. He himself said he has promised that if the government allows him, he will clear northern Afghanistan from Badghis to Badashan province within the next 6 months. I mean, this seems like a
pretty big threat.
Promise that given the past that General Dostum has in defeating the Taliban and being a strong enemy of the Taliban, of course, he could inflict heavy casualties and blow on the Taliban, who are now making inroads in some parts of northern Afghanistan, including Faryab province and General Dostum's stronghold, Zawjan province.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Osman Sharifi. Input there. Coming quickly to you, Mr. Faisal, before we're running out of time. How do you see General Dostum's return in the political sphere of things in Afghanistan, especially considering what he said about the Taliban?
I think on our side, this side, all politicians in the government, we do have this acceptance. We can accept Taliban back to the society, even General Dostum and other prominent political figures who were seen to be the #1 enemies of Taliban are now ready to welcome Taliban back to the society because they know that the solution for a better future. So they agree on that. General Dostum's return in the political arena is something good, especially at this time, because these leaders can come to an agreement for peace. They can come to an agreement to accept.
Even though General Dostum is associated with so much controversy on a personal level of allegations of torture and rape, does that still make it good news for Afghanistan that he is back in the fray?
Well, he belongs to this country. When you talk about tortures or others coming from General Dostum, then we have killings, we have death, suicide attacks, and murders coming from Taliban. If we are welcoming Taliban to the society to make sure that we secure a better future for them and for ourselves, we of course welcome all other leaders who could be somehow involved in cases that are not legal. But that's an issue of transitional justice, and transitional justice comes only after peace, not before peace. So we should have peace first. We should work together, and then we can work about reforms. We can work about transitional justice, and we can come to an agreement on who is right, who is wrong.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Faisal, there, for your input. With that, we're going to quickly move on to a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, the one-year anniversary of the Great March of Return took place just days after escalations between Israel and Hamas after a rocket fired from Gaza destroyed a family home in Tel Aviv. No casualties were reported. Now, according to Hamas-affiliated newspaper, a truce has also been reached to rein in the escalation with the help of Egypt, who is playing the role of mediator once again. Now, we will be talking more on what was agreed with experts here that we have on the show. We highlight a little what a 50-year-old Palestinian, Adil Yassin, said to the Washington Post while walking toward the fence with his 11-year-old son when he was asked about the risk. He said that I don't really care for the risk. And I quote, "We are dying silently anyway. I am not able to feed them and support them," he said of his 8 children. And he also said, "If we are going to die, we will die standing." Now, this is during the protests in the Great March of Return. And just to get an idea before we start exploring in depth the conversation over Gaza, the conversation with Israel and the possible ceasefire, let me show you a small video package that will highlight what this March of Return is.
Every year since 1948, a small space in the world keeps getting worse. Peace and tranquility are almost non-existent. Nobody knows what the night will bring or if the day will be any less dangerous. Tired of the inhumane living conditions in Gaza, a place that world leaders have termed an open-air prison, Palestinians are fighting for the right to live, for the right to self-determination. Since last March, every Friday, hundreds gather to protest in solidarity. Their peaceful demonstrations are met with live bullets and rockets. So far, over 260 have died protesting for their right to return to their ancestors' homelands. 50 children have been murdered for demanding freedom. 6 women have been brutally killed. Half the population here barely makes ends meet, living in deplorable conditions without access to clean drinking water or electricity. Israel continues to crush every last nerve of the people by banning almost all exports from Gaza and having control over imports. The unemployment rate here is the highest in the world, with 70% of youth without a job. According to the UN, Gaza has become highly dependent on aid. This tiny space is just 41 kilometers long and 6 to 12 kilometers wide. With a population of almost 2 million, it's the world's most densely populated place. It shares its northern and eastern borders with Israel, its southern border with Egypt, and to the west lies the Mediterranean Sea, where Palestinian fishermen get shot at by Israeli soldiers if they go beyond 9 nautical miles from the coast. And so they continue to protest, 365 days on. The international community has continued to look the other way, with no end to the atrocities against a crushed nation and the body count rising. When will the world wake up to Gaza?
And while we've talked about 266 to be exact, in fact, 4 more died in the past few days in these protests of Palestinians who have lost their lives to excessive use of gunfire by Israeli forces. Let me also tell you that more than 30,000 have been injured in the past year. And out of these 30,000, 7,000 have died due to have been injured due to live gunfire. And moreover, 136 amputations have taken place as a result of the choice of warfare that Israel picks up against those who are completely unarmed, protesting for their right to self-determination, to their right to return to their homelands. Meanwhile, what we've seen in Tunisia is the Arab League summit. All Arab leaders have come together, have completely slammed U.S. decision to endorse Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. But beyond that, what more was achieved? That is something we also want to discuss with our guests, especially considering that the Qatar Emir had left even before the conclusion of the summit. So here I would like to introduce our guests who are joining us on Newswire today to flesh out this issue. We have Dr. Basem Naim. You are the spokesperson of Hamas. You're joining us from Gaza. And also we have with us Mr. Luciano Zaccara. He is a political analyst and he is joining us from Doha right now. And a journalist from right now, he is in Gaza, Mr. Rami Almeghari. Thank you so much to all three of you for giving us the time and your wisdom on this issue. I want to talk to you first, Mr. Dr. Basem, about first, can you give us an idea? What is the understanding of this truce between Hamas and Israel with the mediator Egypt? Has there been any progress beyond the clauses that have been discussed? Please do enlighten us.
Thank you very much. Still we cannot talk about reaching a truce or a ceasefire, official truce or ceasefire. We are talking about oral understandings between the two parties mediated by the UN and the Egyptians to contain the situation here, to keep the situation as much as possible calm. And for this, the Israeli responded by taking some steps to ease the life in Gaza. The main demand of the Palestinians is to lift the siege immediately and unconditionally, but they didn't respond to this clearly. They have started to take some steps. Our problem always with 2 points. First, the guarantees that this is sustainable and continuous, because at any time the Israelis can stop everything and don't respect even their own words. The second time is the second thing, how they are going to implement it on the ground, because as we say, evil is in the details. Usually they are starting to talk about widening the fishing zone, then we hear some excuses here or there that we were not able to do it today. The same thing about export or import, or about easing the borders, or about other things. Therefore, we are still waiting from the Egyptian party and from the UN delegation, which is today in Gaza, Mr. Miladinov, the head of the political bureau of the UN here in Palestine, to, as I said, we need a detailed written plan about how they are going to implement it. And second, what are the guarantees that this is sustainable? Because we are talking about some problems which might need months and years to be solved. And during these months and years, without any guarantee to continue, the Israelis can spoil everything at any time.
Dr. Basem, there's also some reports coming in that some of the Israeli concessions, some of the terms and conditions, including increasing funding provided by Qatar to the employees for their salaries. There was also talk of increasing this electricity supply and providing for a major desalination project. Are those included in these concessions?
Unfortunately, the media are using the term concessions. Gaza Strip is an occupied territory, and it is the responsibility of the occupation and the occupying power, which is Israel, to care for the life of the people under the occupation. Therefore, it is not an offer or a concession or a gift from the Israelis that they are allowing other countries, which is not responsible for the Israeli crimes here in Gaza. Second, we are talking about 2 million people imprisoned here in Gaza. The right concession or the right step is to lift the siege immediately and unconditionally. Why to consider it or to describe it as concessions? No one can accept that 2 million people continue to live in unlivable situation, in a dire situation like this in Gaza. By the way, the UN described the Gaza Strip as unlivable place. Therefore, we cannot talk about concessions. We are talking about basic human rights.
Absolutely. Also, Dr. Basem, do you feel that these protests that took place a few days ago, how were they different from what we've seen in the past Fridays across 365 days, especially keeping in mind something that the IDF said in a very rare praise to Hamas on how they have managed this protest this time around?
I think the Israelis and some of their supporters were expecting along the last year that they are buying more time by a very aggressive, brutal response to the demonstrations, and by not giving any positive replies to the Palestinian demands, that this is going to break down the will of Palestinians to continue demonstrating and calling for a dignified and free life. The response on Friday was clear. We are talking about the biggest demonstrations since the beginning of the demonstrations on March 30, 2018. We are talking about around 200,000 Palestinians from all Palestinian factions, from all social categories, men and women and elderly and so on. Most peaceful, most contained, most courageous people standing with very cultural and peaceful activities. I think this was a very strong response to the Israeli policies that nothing can break down our will to continue fighting for our dignity and freedom. And I'm honored to repeat what you have said at the beginning. Okay. that if we have the choice to die in silence inside the city.
That was definitely a very strong quote from one of the protesters. Let me come to you, Mr. Rami. You're a journalist. You've been reporting from Gaza for a while. Tell me a little about your observations of the protest that took place a few days ago, and how was it different in what's your understanding of it?
Oh, yeah, actually, thanks for inviting me to this show and to this talk. Let me just begin by saying that the demonstrations that took place on Saturday, 2 days ago, was the most quiet, the most peaceful over the past several months since the marches have begun 1 year ago. And it was clear that there was some kind of organization by the organizers of the Great March of Return to the protests itself that were ongoing on the border lines between Israel and Gaza. And let me just hint at one important fact about the intensity of the injuries and the casualties taking place on the border lines by speaking to a medical staff who confirmed to us that the intensity was less than it has been over the past several months. The intensity of injuries, the number, the casualties, about 2 hours after the march started on Saturday, there was about 20 people injured, and this compared with the previous weeks of a protest, it used to be about 60 or 70 in 2 hours. This would suggest that the Israelis, even the protests were well organized by the organizers of the Great March of Return, Israelis indiscriminately shot Palestinians, trying to spare them and keep them away as long as they can from the border lines. And this has been actually highlighted by the recent Human Rights Council decision and ruling that Israel has been using lethal force against
excessive
Palestinians.
Force. Hold that thought, Mr. Almeghari. I want to come back to the details of the protest, but let me quickly pull in Mr. Zaccara, who is also on the line with us, joining us from Doha. Mr. Zaccara, you heard our friend, our journalist, Mr. Rami, on the ground talking about what the situation was. I want to ask you this, that even after the UN Council giving this statement that this is an excessive use of force that Israel is using, do you think there is maybe finally a global shift in opinion, even amongst the Israelis, on how they address this entire protest or any kind of protest across the buffer zone?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see any change in the positions at the international level. I can see that there is more awareness about the asymmetric way in which Israelis are dealing with the protesters. But so far, we cannot see any fundamental change on another direction that can give more legal or enforcement to the Gaza people. Protest. We are witnessing now that even though there is a strong statement from the Arab League about the last announcement of Trump about the Golan Heights, nothing was really mentioned that would change in any way the position of the Arab League states.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Zaccara, because the importance of the Arab League summit also brings into question what exactly will be achieved, especially considering there are so many issues between the Arab countries with each other. We saw the Qatar's emir leaving earlier, even after just the introduction of the summit. What does that represent to you, the Arab League summit itself?
Well, first of all, we have to bear in mind that 4 leaders were not there. Bashir from Sudan didn't go. The 2 main actors in the Maghreb, Bouteflika and Mohammed VI, the king of Morocco, didn't attend when the meeting is in Tunis. Sultan Qaboos there was left. And as you mentioned, Sheikh Tamim left after the inaugural session, which was really surprising for everybody here. Everybody was praising the presence of Sheikh Tamim as a way to show Qatar interest in discussing regional affairs and Arab affairs. And it was praised as a very good venue to show the Qatari readiness to contribute or to help to get a more strong assessment about the issue. So far, unfortunately, I was not able to gather any strong opinion about what triggered the departure of Tamim unexpectedly. Moreover, having in mind that last week there was also a summit at GCC level with the head of the Shura councils in the region, which also brought some hopes that maybe at not at the highest diplomatic level, but at lower level, there were some kind of reapproachment between the GCC states and Qatar after the blockade. But this summit, it seems that it has to do, I mean, the departure of Tamim from the summit, maybe it has to do with something that happened with King Salman or maybe the Emirati counterpart. So we will not know until very few days. My take on that is that, having in mind all the problems we have, that so far no mention about the reincorporation of Syria to the Arab League, no mention about the GCC crisis so far in the summit. Maybe the fact that it was not discussed triggered the upset of Sheikh Tamim. With all the problems that exist within the Arab League, it would be very difficult to get a common statement that would go even further of so far it has been done. And the only thing that we can get at the final communique is a statement about the annexion of the Golan Heights to Israel as part of the broader Arab League policy regarding the unity of Syria, and a broad statement about the need to support the Palestinian people, but without making any specific decision that would affect any bilateral relation between any Arab state, Israel, or endangering or risking any kind of retaliation from the United States. I mean, nobody wants to.
Nobody wants to upset one of the biggest, the biggest superpower. And here, Dr. Basem, I want to ask you, you must have followed the summit also. Does that give you any hope at all for Gaza's plight, for the plight of Palestinians?
Usually we have been used after all of the summits to hear some nice words at the final decree of the summit, but the more important question on the ground, what's happening? The Israelis have annexed Jerusalem and the Americans have supported them in this decision. They have annexed the Golan Heights and they have given them the legitimacy to do it, and now they are talking about annexing 2/3 or more, maybe all of the West Bank. They are besieging Gaza Strip, but we don't see real practical steps to face or to confront these policies. At least to boycott. For example, today we have the Brazilian president in Palestine. He visited Jerusalem. He accompanied Netanyahu to visit the Western Wall, which means legitimizing the occupation of Jerusalem, and they are going to open a commercial office in Jerusalem. What is the practical steps taken by the Arab Summit or by the Arab League to stop this deterioration? I think the Arabs, they have still many strong cards in their hands, and they can affect, but without a real practical steps on the ground, at least to exercise more pressure on such countries. We don't expect too much.
When you say that the Arabs still have strong cards in their hands, what exactly do you mean?
First of all, I think we are talking about 22 countries, which is a major political group which can affect many decisions within the UN, for example, and to face many politics. They have the oil, they have the strategic passages here, they have their many countries around in Africa and Southeast Asia, which is supporting the Palestinian struggle against the occupation. But these countries, as they cannot be more Catholic than the Pope. If they see Arabic countries, for example, starting to normalize their relationship with the Israelis, despite of the aggression of the Israelis against our people, despite of crimes every day the siege, annexation of Jerusalem. What do you expect from the other countries? I'm talking about the majority of the UN members state are with the Palestinian struggle for freedom and dignity and independence. But again, the Arabs, instead of using these cards, they have a strong commercial asset which can be used with China, with Russia, with many countries to exercise more pressure on the Americans.
So then, Dr. Basem, let me ask you this with the same note. 40,000 people could get together in Gaza to peacefully protest for their right to their ancestral homeland. But we can't see Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas and the PLA come together and unite to take forward this issue, because that, let's be very honest here, the discord between the Palestinians themselves is impeding the progress to achieving their goals here.
It's true. We considering this division between the two Palestinian groups and between Gaza and Ramallah is a very and the most harmful thing happened to the Palestinians in the last 10 years. We have done the maximum. We have made many concessions to achieve reconciliation. We met in Cairo, in Doha, in Moscow, in Senegal, in Sana'a, everywhere to reach reconciliation. Unfortunately, our President Mahmoud Abbas was expecting that his political course with the Israelis, the negotiation, will reach a positive end by founding or establishing a Palestinian state. What we see to do, and what he said yesterday in the summit, that he has fully failed. And despite of this, he is continuously keeping the same track by collaborating with the occupation, security-wise, cooperating with the occupation against his own people in the West Bank. He is proud that he is oppressing and trial of the Palestinians to resist the occupation.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Basem, for your insight there. Coming back to you, Mr. Rami, tell us a little about the situation on the ground as you saw on Saturday. It's very tragic that 3 17-year-old boys lost their lives to fire from IDF. Now, before this, despite the 4 casualties we've seen, were there any special instructions given to the protesters who were participating beforehand to sort of follow, to avoid any kind of military response from the IDF soldiers?
Yes, this is true that the organizers of the Great March of Return had instructed the demonstrators and protesters to stay away from the border lines, to stay away from friction points with the Israeli troops stationed on the borders on the Israeli side. So what I'm saying is that that's true. The demonstrators.
There were instructions. But also, Mr. Rami, is this the first time we saw in different visuals that were surfacing on social media, Hamas wearing a military uniform and actually taking away the protesters from the buffer zone, from the wall, away? Could you tell us a little more about that? Was that unusual?
This is unusual. At the beginning of the marches in the last year, on March and April last year, there was a lot of activities going on, like social, cultural activities on the border lines, away about 500 meters away from the border lines. Just in the beginning, the people were doing some cultural, social activities to show up their resilience, to show up their connection with the lands their fathers and ancestors were displaced from by Israel in 1948. But later on, demonstrations were taking another shape, and the tactics and means by the organizers have changed over the course of time, over the course of last year, including firing tires, used tires, including the balloons that were not flaming, but later they were flaming. And these have been the tactics and means by the demonstrators to intensify their protest and to solidify their message of a protest at Israel's policy, mainly the Israeli policy of blockade on Gaza that has been combined with the main demand of the protest, which is demanding the right of return to their homelands, to the Palestinian homelands occupied by Israel in 1948. Until we reach this last point, by means of mediations by Egyptians and United Nations, in order to quell on the situation, to rein on in the situation, and to preserve some kind of calm in the region that would bring some kind of ease of the Israeli blockade. And that's what have been witnessed over the past couple of days. Today, there is some kind of a talk about easing the blockade by by expanding the fishing zone to 15 miles in some areas of the coast of Gaza. Also allowing discussions about Israeli entry of some W's, or the Israelis called W's.
Right. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you here, Ms. May. We've just run out of time. I have with me on the line Dr. Anis Kassim. You're an international lawyer, and you're also a policy advisor to Al-Shabaka, which is basically a think tank that helps promote a conversation, a debate internationally about the issues of that Palestinians are facing. Welcome to the show. We were talking just now about the Great March of Return, how it was different this year, and also about the buffer zone itself. I believe you can shed some light on the wall itself, how this fence has been a big issue in resolving the conflict that is Gaza and Israel.
This buffer zone, we have to define it first. It takes about 20% of the territory of the Gaza Strip, which is already very tight and very small. It's about 360 kilometers for 2 million people. Mm-hmm. So it's already congested area, probably the most congested area in the world. This buffer zone, now the Palestinians move in their demonstrations to that wall, and it is peaceful demonstration. The Israelis cannot say that any Palestinians used weapons or explosives or of any instrument that threatens the life of the Israelis. Number two, the latest report by the UN Council, which was conducted by an independent commission of investigation, it proved that the marches have been very peaceful. The Palestinians are exercising their right of expression, and the Israelis are using weapons illegally, disproportionately, and with deliberate maiming. Now, this Israel, it is the pretext of Israel is that it is in danger. The International Court of Justice said it cannot be in danger. Israel cannot claim that there is an aggression by people who are under its control. That Gaza territory is an occupied territory. It is so designated from 1967 until today. Therefore, any movement from within the occupied territories cannot be labeled as a movement of aggression. Right. Because first of all, no armed forces. But
Dr. Anis, there has been enough evidence put forward in various forums, whether it is the UN passing various resolutions, whether it's the criminal court, International Criminal Court saying so. But the fact remains that Israel continues to do so, especially when it has the endorsement of the US, like we've seen in the Golan Heights case. So what is the way forward? I mean, how long is Israel going to be able to take this argument that they act in defense?
As long as they carry the protection of the US, they will do and exercise all acts of aggression. Mm-hmm. But what is really needed is to reveal the fact that the oppression, the blockade on Gaza, is really connected to Israel's colonization of the offshore wealth that it has been discovered offshore Gaza, which is the natural gas. There is a natural gas reservoir offshore Gaza within the territorial waters of Gaza that Israel now prevents the Palestinians from developing it. And not only that, it is colonizing it, since their natural resources reservoir, it overlaps with the Palestinian reservoir. This is now the crux of the matter. Israel is conducting pillage and theft of the Palestinian natural wealth.
Under the guise of self-defense, while the international community completely looks away. Mr. Zaccara, let me come to you on this again, trying to wrap our heads around this conundrum where the international community, while condemns it on Israel's move, and we are seeing this more and more, yet nothing can be achieved. What kind of forum needs to put forward conditions or in isolation, or is U.S. going to continue to trump this situation by backing Israel?
Well, unfortunately, we are seeing that the Trump administration is going in the wrong direction. Case with the last announcement that caught everybody by surprise. The annexation of Ghani means that United States, they are not thinking whatsoever in, at least with this administration, to put any limits to the expansionist behavior of Israel toward the Gaza and the West Bank, as we were listening here, and to put any limit on the repression of pacific demonstrations by the Gazan people. Unfortunately, as we said, the Arab League or the Arab countries, they are facing their own issues. They cannot even agree on one common thing.
U.S. endorsing Golan Heights, they might as well then endorse Russia's annexation of Crimea, shouldn't they? I mean, on the same yardstick then.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the states are fighting the battles that they can win, and they don't risk more retaliation from big countries, and because there are too many things at risk in every international dispute. Nobody dares to do anything against the big powers that can isolate themselves from financial aid, from big deals that they are having with the big powers. And having in mind that there is no pressure from the Western countries, neither from the United States, no, unfortunately, nor from the European Union, regarding human rights in the Arab world. There is no push for democratization, for respect for human rights, for the state of rule of law in the Arab countries. So why some regimes that at the same time they are not even very careful about their own human rights would dare and would be careful about what is going on in Gaza? I don't see. I mean, unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic in this sense. I cannot see that there would be enough pressure at the international level to push Israel to change their behavior when the main supporter of Israel at the international level, the United States,
Dr.
drastically split from what Obama did in the last previous presidency.
What the U.S. foreign policy has been for decades. I mean, this is a complete Trump coming out and endorsing the Golan Heights was essentially upsetting the entire foreign policy on these kind of issues that U.S. has had. Dr. Anis, let me bring you into this conversation. You're an expert of international law. What next legal issues can the community take to put a stop to this siege? Or is there absolutely, do you see it also as pessimistically as Mr. Zaccara said?
I think there are ways to bring Israel to the International Criminal Court, because its behavior, it's a rogue state. It is floating all rules of international law. Constantly, there are over 1,000 resolutions by the UN agencies, including the Security Council, General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UNESCO. There are over 1,000 resolutions holding Israel liable and in violation of international law. I would even venture to say Give me one doctrine of international law that Israel has not violated deliberately and many times. Not one, many times.
1,000 resolutions, Dr. Anis, thank you so much, that are out there claiming and proving that Israel has continuously violated international law. And I'm sorry, but that's all the time we have, unfortunately. I just want to thank you, Dr. Basem, Rami, and of course, Dr. Anis and Mr. Zaccara for contributing here, taking out the time, speaking with us. With that, we've come to the end of our show. We'll see you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.